Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. My YouTube channel is Discerning What is True, as I share valuable information tonight about the Tavistock Institute. And very few people know what the Tavistock group is all about. That is the institution. Many of these people who was involved with Tavistock came from the Frankfurt School, which was in Germany, Frankfurt. And what took place was simply is that the rise of Hitler coming to power forced these people, so to speak, and they left the country, that is, of Germany. And Tavistock is not a government-run organization; it's a private institution, and it is still in business, so to speak, today. There's still people working there. So I'm dealing with what I would call the past history of Tavistock, starting from the early 1900s. That is to draw the people of England and to belittle the country of Germany as some type of enemy. When in reality, it had nothing to do with that. It had the perspective that Great Britain was fearful that Germany was becoming a powerful industrial society and they must eliminate it in one way or the other. So they had to paint these people, that is Germans, as corrupt, vicious people who actually were bad people, and we must create a war. But you had to connect the dots here first. Had the United States not approved the Federal Reserve System, there would have not have been a war, folks. There never would have been a war. In fact, there would never have been a war, also World War II. And that would mean also the Korean War and other wars that have taken place on a large scale. It came from what you call creating money out of nothing. And with that, our boys, our young people, good men who was fighting for something, they're told, as they've been told so many times before, that they're fighting for freedom for others, and that's total bullshit. It is basically trying to steal from another country their natural resources in some way, or to eliminate them in one way. So I wanted to give you that background as I talk here about the Tavistock Institute. And these are change agents. This is what it is. That's what John Coleman was trying to relate here. The Tavistock Institute of Human Relations. So it's a changing of what is moral in between a husband and wife or with a family. They know, as well as you should know, that the foundation of all Western societies and civilization is the family. If they can corrupt the family and destroy it, the whole thing collapses. Okay? It's a basic, simple plan, but that's what's going on. So here we go. I'm going to be reading chapter 10, 11, and 12 tonight of this great book that many people need to hear what actually taking place. And also, one other thing is important for people to understand is that so few people know of this group and are unaware of how powerful it is. There are many people who change music. You know, the music of today, the music of the past in the 60s, the 50s, was them involved in that. It didn't happen by happenstance. They produced it in order to produce a way of changing society, little by little. So here we go. The chapter 10 is called Polling Comes of Age. And what they're talking about is taking polls, political polls, and how people think. So the Tavistock Clinic in London was where Sigmund Freud had settled when he arrived from Germany, and where his nephew Edward Bernays later held court. Thus, it was that England became the world center for mass brainwashing. Social engineering experiments that spread to post-war clinics spread all over the United States, and those clinics are operated by universities, you see. And they do it for a reason, folks. They really do. During World War II, Tavistock was the headquarters of the British Army Psychological Warfare Bureau, which, though the arrangements of the British Special Operations Executive, what they call SOE, later known as MI6, dictated policy to the United States Armed Forces in matters of psychological warfare. It dictated policy. Okay, didn't conjure and say, would you like to look at this? No, it dictated policy to the United States Armed Forces. And if you understand what I've been sharing with you tonight, as I shared also the Redemption Manual 4.5, this goes on with this whole idea as the United States and Britain are becoming one, that is in the not only economic sphere, but also in the area of actually being able to control people's thoughts and to destroy the country also. Is it a possibility that Britain itself is jealous of the United States in the past, of its economic power, that it chose to do this? Well, it could be possible, yes, but we really don't know, do we? So towards the end of the war, Tavistock personnel took over the World Federation of Mental Health and Psychological Warfare Division of Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Forces, called SHAEF in Europe. One other thing I want to point out simply is that Tavistock is also involved with mental health. And you better be concerned, because simply mental health has exploded in the last 50 to 60 years. And it's not about helping people neither. Okay? Tavistock's chief theoretician was Dr. Kurt Lewin. Came to the United States to organize the Harvard Psychological Clinic, the MIT Research Center for Groups Dynamics, the Institute of Social Research at the University of Michigan, while his colleagues Cartwright and Cottrell joined him to play a pivotal policy role at the Psychological Department of the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, the Office of Naval Research, ONI, and the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, and the Committee of National Morale. Moreover, a large number of influential people at top policy levels were trained in Dr. Lewin's theory of topological psychology, which is to this day the world's most advanced method of behavior modification, what we would call brainwashing. Important colleagues of Kurt Lewin at Tavistock were Eric Trist, John Rollins Reese, H.V. Dix, and W.R. Byan, and Richard Crossman, plus selected personnel from the Strategic Bombing Survey, the Committee on National Morale, and the National Defense Resource Council joined Lewin at RAND Corporation, that's one of the think tanks, the Stanford Research Institute, SRI, the Wharton School, that is the business school at the University of Pennsylvania, and the National Training Laboratories and National Institute of Mental Health. The United States government began contracting multi-million-dollar projects with all these institutions over a period of 40 years. Tens of billions of dollars has been allocated by the federal government to fund the works of these groups, while additional tens of billions of dollars found their way into these institutions from private foundations. As years passed, these institutions grew, and the scope of projects they contracted grew with them. Every aspect of the mental, psychological life of the American people was profiled, recorded, and stored in computer memory banks. So when you go into a grocery store or any store these days, you'll notice that actually when you enter that store, there is a giant screen with you on that as you come into that store. That happens to be, I've gone to a couple places here locally, that is Walmart, Also, um, another grocery store called, and it'll come to me here in a minute. So, and I don't know if it's just about all the grocery stores do this. Um, but anyway, they taking pictures of you coming in. You see, now your phone in some ways tells them you're there. It is, they know that by your phone gives off a signal, so to speak, in these areas also. And I'm sure in the near future they will do something with your phone while you're in that particular store at Walmart or at Aldi's. They will suggest to you by commercial probably on your phone that you need to buy certain such and things, and there will be a commercial, I think, as though they're looking, pushing their product, so to speak. So the institution's personnel and networks kept on expanding and penetrating deeply into every nook and cranny of federal, state, and local government. Their in-house specialists and graduates were called in to develop policies for welfare departments, labor mediation boards, trade unions, the Air Force, the Navy, the Army, the National Educational Association, and the psychiatric clinics, and the White House, the Defense Department, and the State Department. It also had existing contracts with the Central CIA, Central Intelligence Agency. Close cooperation relations were developed between these think tanks and the USA key polling organizations and the major media companies such as Gallup Poll, the Yankovich CBS New York Times poll, the National Opinion Research Center, and other incessantly conducted psychological profiles of the entire population, sharing the results for the evaluation and processing with the ubiquitous social psychologists. What the public sees in newspapers as opinion polls represents only a fractional portion of the work that the pollsters undertook to do. A key to the control of the Tavistock, other key sectors of the daily business of government in the U.S. is that it now has its own de facto television outlet in Fox News. Since its acquisition by Richard Murdoch, a virtuous, seamless propaganda machine for the government. Continue. Above this closely knit grouping of social psychologists, pollsters, and media manipulators preside elite, powerful patrons, the gods of Olympias, that is, the Committee of 300. It is known in informal service circles that the group controls everything in the world with the exception of Russia and latterly China. Its plans and acts our long-term strategic strategies in a total, disciplined, and unified manner. It commands over 400 of the top Fortune 500 companies, which is basically 80% control, in the United States with interlocking connections that reach into every facet of government, trade, banking, foreign policy, intelligence agencies, and the military establishment. It has absorbed all the other power groups of earlier U.S. history, that is, the Rothschilds, Morgan, Rockefeller Group, the Eastern liberal establishment personified by the Perkins, Cabot, Lodge families, the cream of the old East Indian opium trade that generated billions of dollars. Its hierarchy comprises the old families descended from the British East India Company, with its vast fortunes derived from the opium trade that is run from the top down, including European royalty, among others. Do you understand that these so-called well-to-do people actually are involved in getting people to take drugs? So when you see this stuff that's going on your border here to the south here, in Mexico, it's not some two-fling deal here. It's major families that are involved in getting it here. And this is basically opium type of thing, but it's also to do with drugs. In the deeper recesses, well, in fact, if you understand what's going on in California and your major cities, you'll see that basically where does these kids, that is, people live on the streets, okay? Where do they get those drugs? Who gives them the drugs? Okay. And in reality, it simply is that most of these people are struggling in their lives and have no hope. And so they're just existing, which is a sad, sad, sad story about how far this country's fell. We're already a third world country, folks. You just haven't realized it yet. In the deeper recesses of the intelligent establishment in Washington, veterans intelligence officers refer to this awesome group in hushed tones and mystery languages as the Committee of 300. The leaders are called the Olympians. No U.S. president is elected or remains in office safe and is set by their favor. Those who buck their control are removed. Examples simply are John F. Kennedy, Richard Nixon, and Lyndon Johnson. The Committee of 300 is the international socialist one world government that runs the New World Order from behind the scenes, where it will remain until it is ready to emerge and take over in full control of all governments of the world in the international communistic dictatorships. Communism is not dead, folks. It's just morphed into something else. That's what they did. And if you understand that with the whole situation with what took place from the Soviet Union collapsing in 1989, and people celebrating as though it's over, when reality has never been over. It just changed. It morphed into something else, you see. Chapter 11, the paradigm shift in education. During the 1970s, a dramatic paradigm shift in school curriculum at all levels came to effect, apparently to the point that students were awarded school credits for courses in civics instead of reading, writing, and arithmetic. An epidemic of casual sex and drug taking overwhelmed school-aged teens and swept over the entire country. In July of 1980, a major international conference was held in Toronto, Canada, under the auspices of First Global Conference on the Future, in which 4,000 social engineers, cybernetic experts, and futurologists from all of the think tanks participated. The conference was under the direction of Tavistock Institute billionaire chairman Maurice Strong, who set the theme. Now this is, again, this is in 1980, folks. This is when I was only 20 years old. Okay? Here's his statement. The time has come to move from thinking and dialogue to action. This conference will become the launching pad for that important action to occur in the 1980s. Strong was chairman of Petro Canada, one of the several flagship companies of the Olympians. His background was British intelligence MI6, where he had held the rank of colonel during World War II. Strong and his network of companies were heavily involved in highly lucrative opium, heroin, cocaine trade. Strong and Aldous Huxley were responsible for the LSD plague that swept the United States and later Europe. He was a former director of the United Nations Environmental Program. One of the chief speakers for the Olympians at the conference was Dr. Aurelio, I don't know how to pronounce this, so I'm just going to say P-E-C-C-E-I, chairman of the Club of Rome, a NATO think tank. NATO stands for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It was created with the framework of the Aquarian Conspiracy, a project by the social scientists at Stanford University under the direction of Willis Harman. NATO in turn formed and promoted a new branch called the Club of Rome, the name being designed to confuse and disassemble as it had nothing to do with the Catholic Church. Let me explain to you what is occurring right now with the situation with Ukraine. It's all to do with NATO. It's a policy that the United States has been involved in for years, and it has to do with simply seeing Russia as the enemy. And so the United States, under its particular way of looking at things, has decided that basically to implement certain weapons into the Eastern European countries such as Czechoslovakia, Bulgaria, Ukraine, and Poland. And it's a way of basically isolating Russia. Okay, it's a policy with that. Okay, foreign policy. So let me continue. Without going into the technicalities of the Club of Rome, hereinafter referred to as the Club, its purpose was to act as a counterweight against post-industrial agricultural and military expansion, a so-called post-industrial agricultural zero-growth society. That's what's happening right now. There's no growth here in the United States in the industry at all. There's no growth in industry in Europe hardly anymore. And it's also to do with agriculture. If you keep up with what's going on in the Netherlands, as the government is now forcing farmers to no longer farm, which was meant to halt Americans' burgeoning manufacturing industry and growing mechanizing farming food production capability. Membership of the club and NATO were interchangeable. The Stanford Research, the Tavistock Institute, and other centers of applied social psychiatry joined it. In 1994, Tavistock signed a major contract with NASA to evaluate the effects of its space program. The club itself was only founded in 1968 as part of the call for a new world order inside of one world government. What the club became was an instrument to enforce limits of growth on industrial nations, and the United States was the first country to be targeted. So this is why you see the manufacturing sector in this country is declined tremendously. This is why there are no jobs here, folks. Part of that was to do with NAFTA. And those jobs have gone to China. And the reason why those jobs have gone to China is a couple reasons. First of all, the Chinese are willing to work at that point when they were started and to get low wages. And China was also allowed anything and whatever to take place there, meaning that they will allow pollution. Their products are made that are actually harms nature. That is, in rivers, they throw their pollution right into the water. They do that. So there's no supposedly any protection for that, you see. They don't care. But yet they speak highly of how good they are, but they're not. This was, in fact, one of the earliest steps taken to implement the 300 goal of returning the United States to a state of feudalism, a feudal society. One of the industries the club railed against was nuclear energy, and they were successful in halting construction of all nuclear electricity generating plants that has put demand 1,000 years ahead of the supply of electrical power. NATO was its military alliance meant to keep Russia in line. On the agenda of the 1980 meetings referred to above were the following: Women Liberation Movement, Black Consciousness, racial mixing, breaking down taboos against mixed marriage as propounded by anthropologists Margaret Mead and Gregory Basin of Tavistock. They knew how to they're trying to destroy all the races, you see, but particularly the white race. It was decided at this meeting that an aggressive program would be launched to portray colored races as superior to Western civilization white persons. From this forum came Oprah Winfrey and a host of black persons who were picked up and trained for their roles to portray mixed races as superior to whites. It could also be seen in movies where black movie stars suddenly proliferate until they became household names. It was seen also where a black person was placed in the role as a high position of authority over whites, such as a judge or a district head of the FBI and the military, CEOs of large corporations. Youth rebellion against imagined social wrongs was pushed. Emerging interests in social responsibility of business. The generation gap implying a changing paradigm. The anti-technological bias of many young people. Experimentation with new family structures, impersonating relationships in which homosexuality and lesbianism became normalized and no different from other people accepted at all levels of society to lesbian moms. The emergence of the fake conservative / ecology movements such as Greenpeace, that was controlled by them. A surge in interest in Eastern religion and philosophical perspectives. Isn't that interesting? Since we have all this new age stuff going on around us. So a surge in interest in Eastern religion and philosophical perspectives. A renewed interest in fundamentalism, that is in Christianity. Labor unions shifting emphases to quality of work, environment. An increasing interest in meditation and other spiritual disciplines. The Kabbalah was to supplant Christian culture, and special people were chosen to teach and spread Kabbalah. Early chosen disciples were Shirley MacLaine, Roseanne Barr, and later Madonna and Demi Moore. The increasing importance of self-realization processes, reinventing of music, hip-hop, and rap by such groups as Ice Cube. I've done something back, I told someone this back in the 1990s. I saw a shift in music, and it was to do with hip-hop and rap music, because what it does, it speaks of a woman as being a whore. The music is so derogative towards women, it's unbelievable. So they're bringing down the female. This is their whole idea. Again, to destroy the family. After all, she is the one who has children. A new language form in which English is so mutilated as to be unintelligible. This is being carried over into new readers on prime-time television. These disparate trends signify the emergence of a created climate of social upheaval and far-reaching changes as a new image of human beings began to take hold, bringing with them radical changes in Western society. So what's happening simply is you're having a new language taking place, meaning that simply is you can no longer have a common platform to be able to carry on a conversation with people, because suddenly what's happened simply is they've adopted these other particular words that really are not cogent of what we call being able to truly think and to share deeper ideas. It's on a what I would call on a thin ice of what we would call it, instead of a deeper deal when you were talking about, being, for example, the soil. So you're talking about a thin ice dealing with what you call crops, which is not going to work, but it used to be at least 6 or 8 ounces, 6 or 8 inches deep, so to speak. Okay, so I'm just giving you an idea or illustration how it's now become veneer. That's all it is. It's veneer. It has no depth at all. This is very trends signified the emergence of a creative climate of social upheaval. Okay, I just said that. A leaderless but powerful network, the Invisible Army, began working to bring about unacceptable change in the United States. They don't quit neither. Its rank and file members were the shock troops, who radicalized all forms of the norm, breaking with the certain key elements of Western civilization. Among the Olympians, this network was known as the Aquarian Conspiracy. I'm going to think about reading that book for you guys too. This should be interesting because I've never read the book at all. Okay, it'd be a good idea to read this. This quote unquote said the writer was Marilyn Ferguson, but I don't think that's true. They just gave her credit for it. Someone else wrote it for her. And its adherents were to be known as invisible shock troops. The massive paradigm, gigantic, irrevocable ship overtook America while we slept, sweeping away the old with new political, religious, and philosophical systems. It was what citizens of the New World Order, that is, one world government, would have to exhibit hereafter. A new mind, the rise of a new order with no nation states. Pride of place and pride of race, a culture of the past, destined to the dustbin of history, never to be revived. We know from experience, and one other thing I would say something, this used to be, if you wanted to change this type of thing with a family, culture, all these things, it took hundreds and hundreds of years for this to happen in the past. And yet, they've been able to do this within the last 25 to 30 years in this country, and also in Europe, which is where all the war is actually being, because this is what we call the last hedge of what we call Western superiority, intellect, what do you want to call it, educational system, all that. That's where it's at. With that falling, there's nowhere to go but collapse. This massive paradigm, gigantic, irrevocable ship overtook America while we slept, sweeping away the old with new politics, political, religious, and philosophical. It was what citizens of the New World Order and one world government would have to exhibit hereafter. A new mind, the rise of a new order with no nation states, pride of place or pride of race, a culture of the past destined to dustbin of history, never to be revived. We know from experience that this work is likely to be greeted with scorn and disbelief. Some will even pity us. Terms like off the wall will be used to describe this work. This is the standard reaction when the motivations of Tavistock social scientists, brainwashers, opinion makers, social psychologists have for acting out their war on the United States are not known. The probability is 90% of the American people do not know that Tavistock declared war on the German civilian population to end World War II. When that conflict ended in 1946, the Tavistock practitioners of mass brainwashing and opinion went to war against the American people. If this is how you react when you read this expose, don't feel bad, then understand that it is the way you are expected to react. If the motivation appears far-fetched and lacking credibility, also incomprehensible, then the motivation does not exist. That being the case, then the action that derives from it does not exist. Therefore, ergo, E-R-G-O, the Olympians do not exist and there is no conspiracy. But the hard fact is that gigantic conspiracy does exist. No doubt Kurt Lewin, the top scientist at Tavistock and key theoretician of all think tanks, could explain it more clearly than we have been able to do if he chose to. His practices arrive from what he's called it topological psychology doctrine. Lewin is the man upon whose theories the psychological warfare battles of World War II were fought so successfully. The man who planned and executed the strategic bombing survey that brought Germany to defeat in World War II through the wholesale destruction of 65% of German workers' housing, to which we have just referred to very briefly. And what I mean by that, it was an attack upon the people, not the army, folks. Get that in your head. Understand what he's saying here. This is also a makeup, if you understand, if you go back over 100 years before that, than what took place in the South with the North, when they were treated the same way. There was no military objective many times. The objective was to destroy the farms, their houses, and steal their valuables, and to burn down their houses. That's what took place at the turn of the war between the states, or Civil War. Do you understand? It's not a battle between army and army here. It's a army decides to, quote unquote, to destroy what's little left of what the South was. Since we were, quote unquote, the bad boys. Since we were the rebels. If you reflect sometimes you discover that the South actually did attack the North, but it was a completely different object in what they did. They never attacked the civilians, folks. They never did that. A completely different framework of how they fought a war compared to what the Yankees did. And again, I am from the South, and I'm going to be a little bit prejudiced about that because what I see has happened. So let's continue with chapter 12 here. Lewin's doctrine of identity change. The Lewin doctrine is not easy for laymen to follow. Basically, Lewin said that all psychological phenomenon occurs in a domain defined as psychological phase space. That's P-H-A-S-E, space. This space is composed of two independent fields, the environment and the self. The concept of control environment arose from the study that if you have a fixed personality, that is one susceptible to being predictable profile, and if you want to elicit from this personality a particular type of behavior, then all you have to do is control the third variable of the equation and thus produce the desired behavior. This was the norm in social psychological formulas. MI6 used it in almost every type of situation involving negotiations, Army counterinsurgents operation, labor negotiation, and the diplomatic negotiations used it up until apparently the 1960s. After 1960, Tavistock changed the equation by placing greater emphasis on technique of control the environment, not the behavior, but the desired personality. What Lewin set out to accomplish was far more drastic and permanent, altering the deeper structure of human personalities. In short, what Lewin succeeded in doing was to move beyond behavior modification to identity change. Identity change was adopted by the nations of the world. Nations worked to acquire a new personality that would change the way the world looked at them. The theory relied upon the original formation of two Tavistock theoreticians, Dr. William Sargent, this S-A-R-G-E-N-T theory, and his battle for the mind, and Kurt Lewin's own work on personality regression. Lewin observed that the inner self of the individual displays certain reactions when under tensions from the environment. When there was no tension, then the normal inner self of a person is well differential, balanced, multifaceted, versatile. When a reasonable amount of tension is applied from the environment, then all the various abilities and faculties of the inner self go on alert, ready for effective action. But when an intolerable amount of tension is applied, then this geometrically collapses into a blind, undifferential soup, a primitive, a regressed personality. The person is reduced to an animal. The higher differential and versatile abilities disappeared. Think about that, folks. The control environment takes over the personality. So it is this Lewin technique that is used on the captives held at Guantanamo Bay prison camp in defiance of international law and the U.S. Constitution. This actually is in Cuba. It's a part of Cuba that the United States has got a military base there, prison. The gross misconduct of the Bush administration at the camp is beyond the pale of normal Western Christian civilization, and is accepted by a docile American public might be the first sign that the American people have been so changed by Tavistock, long-range penetration and interdirectional conditioning that they are now ready to descend to the level of the New World Order and a one-world government where such barbaric treatment will be regarded as normal and acceptable without protest. The fact that medical doctors took part in this inhumane torture of fellow human beings and felt no remorse would indicate just how far down the world has already fell. This has been observed as being the basis for the military camp at Guantanamo, Cuba, which was opened there to avoid the restrictions of the U.S. Constitution and to provide Lewin-type control environment. The men being held at the psychological prison are now in a state of regression, where they have been reduced to the level of animals. Who would want to do something like this? Ask yourself that question. Who would want to do that? At this camp that we predict will be established all over the United States and the world when the New World Order of one world government assumes total world control, it is sadistic, inhumane, and bestiality, designed to break the national pride of the victim, to break the will to resist, and to reduce the prisoners to the level of beasts. During the First World Government experiment in the then USSR, men were allowed to use toilets only to be interrupted in the middle of evacuation and hustle out before they could clean themselves. Abu Ghraib and Guatemala were about at that level when the controllers were roughly subjected to the worldwide scrutiny. General Miller, who was the chief capo, has since disappeared from sight. Dissidents who insist on the U.S. government obeying the Constitution and demanding their constitutional rights will in future be treated as dissidents, exactly like Stalin treated his dissidents in Russia. Future Guantanamo's that have sprung up all over America are potent of the future, only that we can rely. So that's the end of chapter 12 tonight. Trying to share with you this important information again with Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, and how what is being done is a slow change, and in reality, people are changing. People, I know that. I see it all around myself here, where I'm at here in my neighborhood. I see it. It's very clear. And it's to basically to keep people what I would call docile, that they won't speak out anymore about what's going wrong, even in neighborhoods. They won't speak out about anything that's some innocent child, so supposedly, in many ways. So this concludes tonight's 2 shows, that is, revealing not only the Tavistock Institute, but also the Redemption Manual 4.5. I hope that you appreciate what I'm sharing, and I wish you a good night, and you take care. Okay?